It all started on a warm summer evening, the kind where the sun sets slowly, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I remember sitting at a small cafe with my friends, laughing and sharing stories. That's when I first laid eyes on him. He was sitting at a nearby table, engrossed in a book, his glasses perched on his nose, and a slight smile playing on his lips. There was something about him that drew me in, a quiet confidence that intrigued me. I nudged my friend and whispered, "Look at that guy. He seems like he'd be a great second choice." We both laughed, but little did I know that this offhand comment would come back to haunt me. As the weeks went by, I found myself thinking about him more often. I learned his name was Mark, and he was a software engineer. We crossed paths a few times at the cafe, exchanging shy smiles and brief conversations. I was dating someone else at the time, but there was an undeniable chemistry between Mark and me. It was as if we were two magnets, drawn together despite the barriers in our lives. One evening, after a particularly long day, I decided to approach him. "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say I love your taste in books," I said, my heart racing. He looked up, surprised, and smiled. "Thanks. I'm always looking for recommendations if you have any." That simple exchange sparked a friendship that quickly blossomed into something more. We started meeting regularly, sharing our favorite novels, discussing our dreams, and laughing over coffee. I was still with my boyfriend, but I couldn't help but feel a connection with Mark that I had never experienced before. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I often joked with my friends about how Mark was my second choice, a playful comment that seemed harmless at the time. But deep down, I knew I was falling for him. As summer turned to fall, my relationship with my boyfriend began to crumble. We were growing apart, and I found myself confiding in Mark more and more. He was always there to listen, offering support and understanding. One chilly evening, as we walked through a park, I finally admitted to him that I was unhappy in my current relationship. "I feel like I'm stuck in a rut," I confessed, my breath visible in the cold air. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "You deserve to be happy," he said softly. In that moment, I realized that I wanted to be with him, not just as a friend, but as something more. After weeks of soul-searching, I made the difficult decision to end my relationship. It was a painful process, filled with tears and heartache, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to be true to myself and my feelings. The moment I broke the news to my boyfriend, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by anxiety. What if I was making a mistake? What if Mark wasn't the right choice after all? I reached out to Mark, and he was incredibly supportive. We began dating officially, and it felt like a dream come true. I often reflected on my earlier joke about him being my second choice, but now it felt like he was my first choice, my only choice, my only choice. We spent countless hours together, exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and sharing our hopes for the future. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. However, as our relationship progressed, I started to notice some red flags. Mark was incredibly ambitious, often working late hours and prioritizing his career above all else. I admired his dedication, but I also craved more quality time together. I tried to communicate my feelings, but he would brush them off, insisting that it was just a phase. "Once I get this promotion, things will settle down," he would say, and I wanted to believe him. As the months passed, the initial excitement of our relationship began to fade. I found myself feeling lonely, even when we were together. I missed the deep conversations we used to have, the laughter that came so easily. Instead, our interactions became more about logistics and less about connection. I often joked with my friends about how I had traded one second choice for another, but deep down, I was starting to feel the weight of that joke. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I turned to him and said, "You know, I used to joke about you being my second choice, but I really thought we were building something special." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I thought so too," he replied, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. That moment marked a turning point in our relationship. I realized that I needed to confront the issues we were facing, but I was terrified of what that might mean for us. After weeks of soul searching, I made the difficult decision to end my relationship. It was a painful process, filled with tears and heartache, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to be true to myself and my feelings. The moment I broke the news to my boyfriend, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by anxiety. What if I was making a mistake? What if Mark wasn't the right choice after all? I reached out to Mark, and he was incredibly supportive. We began dating officially, and it felt like a dream come true. I often reflected on my earlier joke about him being my second choice, but now it felt like he was my first choice, my only choice. We spent countless hours together, exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and sharing our hopes for the future. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. However, as our relationship progressed, I started to notice some red flags. Mark was incredibly ambitious, often working late hours and prioritizing his career above all else. I admired his dedication, but I also craved more quality time together. I tried to communicate my feelings, but he would brush them off, insisting that it was just a phase. "Once I get this promotion, things will settle down," he would say, and I wanted to believe him. As the months passed, the initial excitement of our relationship began to fade. I found myself feeling lonely, even when we were together. I missed the deep conversations we used to have, the laughter that came so easily. Instead, our interactions became more about logistics and less about connection. I often joked with my friends about how I had traded one second choice for another, but deep down I was starting to feel the weight of that joke. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I turned to him and said, "You know, I used to joke about you being my second choice, but I really thought we were building something special." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I thought so too," he replied, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. That moment marked a turning point in our relationship. I realized that I needed to confront the issues we were facing, but I was terrified of what that might mean for us. As the months rolled on, I found myself grappling with the reality of our situation. I began to question whether I had made the right choice in leaving my previous relationship for Mark. I often replayed our early days in my mind, the excitement and the thrill of new love. But now, those feelings were overshadowed by a growing sense of dissatisfaction. I felt like I was living in a constant state of longing, yearning for the connection we once had. I started to confide in my friends, sharing my frustrations and fears. They were supportive, but I could sense their concern. "Are you sure this is what you want?" one of my friends asked. "You deserve someone who makes you feel valued." I knew she was right, but I was scared of the unknown. I had invested so much time and energy into this relationship, and the thought of starting over was daunting. I often replayed my initial joke about Mark being my second choice in my mind, wondering if I had made a mistake. As the holidays approached, I felt a sense of dread. We had planned to spend them together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wanted to enjoy the festivities, but the tension between us was palpable. I found myself daydreaming about what it would be like to be single again, to rediscover myself outside of a relationship. As the strain in our relationship grew, I found myself questioning everything. Was I truly happy with Mark? Or was I simply clinging to the idea of what we could be? I began to notice the little things that bothered me more than they should have. His habit of leaving dirty dishes in the sink, his tendency to prioritize work over our plans, and the way he would often dismiss my feelings as overreactions. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid to voice my concerns for fear of starting an argument. One night, after a particularly long week, I decided to confront him. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, my heart racing. He looked up from his laptop, a frown creasing his forehead. "Can it wait?" "I'm really busy right now." I felt a pang of frustration. "No, it can't wait. I feel like we're drifting apart. And I don't want to lose what we have." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just trying to build a future for us. Can't you see that?" I wanted to understand his perspective, but I also needed him to understand mine. "I appreciate your hard work, but I need you here with me too. I want to feel like a priority, not an afterthought. He looked at me, his expression softening. I'm sorry if I've made you feel that way. I'll try to do better. For a brief moment, I felt hopeful. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized that his promises were just words. The distance between us continued to grow, and I found myself feeling more alone than ever. I started to confide in my friends, sharing my frustrations and fears. They were supportive, but I could sense their concern. Are you sure this is what you want? One of my friends asked. You deserve someone who makes you feel valued. I knew she was right, but I was scared of the unknown. I had invested so much time and energy into this relationship, and the thought of starting over was daunting. I often replay my initial joke about Mark being my second choice in my mind, wondering if I had made a mistake. As the holidays approached, I felt a sense of dread. We had planned to spend them together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wanted to enjoy the festivities, but the tension between us was palpable. I found myself daydreaming about what it would be like to be single again, to rediscover myself outside of a relationship. The breaking point came unexpectedly during a holiday party at Mark's office. I had been looking forward to it, hoping it would be a chance for us to reconnect. But as the night wore on, I felt increasingly out of place. Mark was engrossed in conversations with his colleagues, leaving me to navigate the social scene alone. I tried to engage with others, but I couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. As the evening progressed, I overheard Mark discussing a promotion he was vying for, his eyes lighting up with excitement. I felt a pang of jealousy mixed with sadness. Why couldn't he share that enthusiasm with me? I approached him, hoping to spark a conversation. Hey, I'm really proud of you for going after that promotion, I said, forcing a smile. He barely glanced my way. Thanks, but I need to focus right now. Can we talk later? In that moment, I felt invisible. I excused myself to the restroom, tears welling in my eyes. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to regain my composure. As I looked in the mirror, I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I had been holding on to the hope that things would improve, but deep down, I knew I was unhappy. When we returned home that night, I confronted Mark. I can't keep doing this, I said, my voice trembling. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know how to fix it. He looked taken aback, his expression shifting from surprise to frustration. You're being dramatic. I'm just busy with work. Can't you understand that? His dismissive tone ignited a fire within me. No, I can't. I need you to be present in this relationship, not just physically, but emotionally too. I feel like I'm fighting for your attention, and it's exhausting. The argument escalated, with both of us raising our voices. I felt a mix of anger and sadness as I realized how far we had drifted apart. Maybe we need to take a break, I suggested, my heart racing. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't be serious. We've built a life together. I know, but I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not, I replied, tears streaming down my face. That night marked a turning point in our relationship. We went to bed in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. I knew that things couldn't continue as they were, but I was terrified of what that meant for us. The days following our argument were filled with tension and uncertainty. We were living in the same space, but it felt like we were worlds apart. I tried to reach out to Mark, but he seemed distant, retreating into his work even more. I felt like I was losing him, and the weight of that realization was suffocating. I began to reflect on our relationship, replaying moments in my mind. I remembered the laughter, the shared dreams, and the love that had once brought us together. But I also recalled the growing distance, the missed connections, and the feeling of being second best. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had settled for someone who didn't truly appreciate me. One evening, as I sat alone in our living room, I made the decision to reach out to a therapist. I needed someone to help me navigate my feelings and gain clarity on what I truly wanted. The first session was eye-opening. I shared my experiences with Mark, my fears, and my doubts. The therapist listened attentively, guiding me to explore my emotions. What do you want for yourself? She asked gently. I paused, realizing I hadn't truly considered that question in a long time. I wanted to feel valued, loved, and respected. I wanted a partner who would prioritize our relationship, not just their career. As I left the session, I felt a sense of empowerment. I knew I needed to have another conversation with Mark, one that would be honest and open. A few days later, I mustered the courage to sit down with him. Mark, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I began, my heart racing. I don't want to keep living in this limbo. I need to know if we're on the same page. He looked at me, his expression guarded. What do you mean? I mean, I feel like we're not in this together anymore. I want to know if you see a future for us, I said, my voice steady. He hesitated, and in that moment, I knew the answer. I'm not sure, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. I had been hoping for a different response, but deep down, I knew we had been drifting apart for a long time. Maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways, I suggested, tears welling in my eyes. Mark nodded slowly, his expression pained. I think you're right. I don't want to hold you back. In that moment, I felt a sense of closure. It was painful, but I knew it was the right decision. We spent the next few days packing up our lives, reminiscing about the good times while acknowledging the reality of our situation. As I packed my belongings, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. I was leaving behind a relationship that had once brought me joy, but I was also stepping into a new chapter of my life. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to find my happiness again. The days following our separation were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a mix of sadness, relief, and uncertainty about the future. I had spent so much time with Mark, and now I was faced with the daunting task of rediscovering myself. I leaned on my friends for support, sharing my experiences and fears. They were there for me, reminding me that I was strong and capable of moving forward. As the weeks turned into months, I began to embrace my newfound freedom. I started exploring hobbies I had neglected, reconnecting with friends, and focusing on my career. I realized that I had lost a part of myself in my relationship with Mark, and now it was time to reclaim it. I took up painting, something I had always loved but never had the time for. I found solace in the colors and the creative process, allowing myself to express my emotions in a new way. I also began to reflect on my past relationship, recognizing the lessons I had learned. I understood the importance of communication, the need for emotional connection, and the value of prioritizing oneself. I vowed to never settle for less than I deserved again. As I moved forward, I found myself open to new possibilities. I started dating again, but this time with a sense of clarity. I was no longer looking for someone to fill a void. I was seeking a partner who would complement my life, someone who would appreciate me for who I was. One evening, as I sat in my favorite cafe, I spotted a familiar face across the room. It was Mark. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I felt a rush of nostalgia. But then I remembered the journey I had taken, the growth I had experienced, and the lessons I had learned. I smiled at him, a sense of peace washing over me. I had joked about him being my second choice, but now I understood that I was my own first choice. I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that I had the strength to create a life filled with love, happiness, and authenticity. As I continued to navigate the dating scene, I found myself meeting new people, each with their own stories and experiences. I learned to appreciate the beauty of connection, even if it didn't always lead to something long-term. I discovered that it was okay to take my time, to explore my feelings, and to prioritize my own happiness. I also began to focus on my career, pouring my energy into projects that excited me. I found fulfillment in my work, and it became a source of empowerment. I realized that I didn't need a partner to complete me. I was whole on my own. As the months passed, I continued to grow and evolve. I embraced the lessons I had learned from my relationship with Mark, using them to shape my future. I became more confident in my decisions, more assertive in my needs, and more aware of my worth. I started to build a supportive community around me, surrounding myself with friends who uplifted and encouraged me. We would gather for game nights, movie marathons, and spontaneous adventures. I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced in a long time. One day, while out with friends, I met someone new. His name was Alex, and he had a warmth about him that instantly drew me in. We struck up a conversation, and I found myself laughing and enjoying his company. It felt refreshing to connect with someone who was genuinely interested in getting to know me. As we spent more time together, I realized that I was ready to open my heart again. I approached this new relationship with caution, mindful of the lessons I had learned from my past. I communicated openly with Alex about my feelings, my hopes, and my fears. To my surprise, he reciprocated with honesty and vulnerability. Our relationship blossomed, and I found myself falling for him in a way that felt different from before. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a genuine connection that allowed us both to be ourselves. I felt valued and appreciated, and it was a beautiful feeling. As I reflected on my journey, I realized that my experience with Mark had shaped me into the person I was becoming. I had learned the importance of self-love, the value of communication, and the necessity of prioritizing my own happiness. I was no longer afraid to be vulnerable, to express my needs, and to seek out the love I deserved. In the end, I understood that my initial joke about Mark being my second choice had been a reflection of my own insecurities. I had been searching for validation in someone else, but now I knew that true happiness came from within. I was my own first choice, and that realization empowered me to embrace the future with open arms. As I stood on the precipice of a new chapter in my life, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that I had the strength to overcome them. I had learned to love myself, to value my worth, and to embrace the journey of life with all its ups and downs. And so, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready to create a life filled with love, joy, and authenticity. I had come a long way from the girl who joked about her second choice, and I was proud of the woman I had become.